You'll have come across at least one game which you remember not for being incredibly polished or popular, but because it provided a personal experience unrivaled to any other. For me, that game is MixMaster. On the surface, it's a fairly simple early 2000s MMO. You fight monsters, collect them, rinse and repeat. Eventually, you'll roll the dice and risk losing all of your hard work for the chance to get a better monster. And that's the rewarding yet brutally punishing defining mechanic which keeps pulling you back for more. I played this game on and off for years and lots has changed about it, so in this video I'm going to revisit MixMaster as a whole from its history to the live game in the present day. I'll be doing a technical breakdown of the fundamental mixing mechanic and offer a few thoughts about how the game might change in the future. MixMaster is a game about fighting monsters and creating new ones. These monsters are known as cores and have unique types. Different cores have different characteristics and stats which increase when they level up from fighting other monsters. The real core gameplay is in mixing collected cores together. There's a huge number of combinations of cores, some of which are more likely to produce a better one than others. The catch with this is that mixing cores doesn't guarantee an offspring, so there's every chance that you could graft to get two great monsters and lose everything in an unsuccessful mix. Despite this, it adds a bit of challenge without it usually getting too cumbersome, as monsters are typically easily accessible, so even when you lose them, they're not too hard to get back. The game is an MMO, meaning there are other players who you can interact with, either with chatting, trading, or player versus player fighting. Given the game's geographical location, it was always a bit difficult for me to get to know other players due to language barrier, but it's definitely a thing that can be done. The game starts out by asking you to select a character. They have unique weapons and fighting styles, but there's not much choice with only 4, and as I've mentioned already, the main gimmick is fighting with the monsters. When you start the game, you'll load into the tutorial area, which you can't leave until you've fought some baddies and got yourself some cores. Following the quests through will let you escape the tutorial area and give you freedom to explore the world. I'll mention now that the quest lines when I played them years ago were so janky and incomplete. That might have changed now, but I haven't had much time to explore them while I was playing through it for this video. You're presented with a few paths to take, and each area has its own selection of monsters to fight and collect. You'll need to explore all of them to be able to get the right cores for mixing and to complete the quests, as NPCs are dotted around seemingly randomly. In my experience, once you get to Hesiba, the difficulty ramps up and the battles get a lot harder. My skills take me all the way to Wawalji Priory, which is just so difficult and I've never been able to get any further than it. So where do you go from here? My personal goal with the game was to get all the monsters that I wanted to, but the guide at the time wasn't very detailed at all. Fortunately, there's a database section on the current version of the website which explains it in a much more comprehensive way how to get them all, which is a huge improvement over previous iterations. This is where the strange changes to the game come into play. Over the years that I kept revisiting the game, I often lost my progress and had to start again from the beginning. Except sometimes there would be crazy things happening, like super rare monsters appearing that were incredibly easy to get, or insane events like 100% core drop rate. I'd play through as much as I could and then put the game down again, only to find next time that I needed to go back to the beginning because my account didn't exist. What exactly caused this? Let me draw up a timeline. According to an IGN interview with one of the game masters at the time, MixMaster was released initially in Korea in 2003 and was successful enough over the first few years to release it to the global market. At this point, the game was published by a company called Seed C. MixMaster, along with a few other games also published by Seed C, were held on a website called Levo. I have no idea if that's pronounced right. Beyond this point, everything is a little bit hazy, as information about the game is tricky to get hold of, so some of my facts might be a little bit incorrect here. Around 2010, Levo was acquired by a company called Big Globe, thus prompting the Levo final event for players, which seemed like a big party with a new NPC capable of triggering assorted fun things. The end of Levo era to me seems like the first point where the accounts would reset. This may or may not be correct, but it certainly has an air of finality to it. There's a period of time between 2010 and 2017 during Big Globe ownership where I can't find much information at all, but the game was still playable on and off. Fast forward to 2017, and MixMaster has yet again been acquired by a different company, Joypool Games, an offshoot of the company Joypool, which is based in Brazil. They launched a beta version in 2017, which I remember being pretty much exactly the same as the last version of the game that I'd played. I assume they must have been running it with their own servers and infrastructure, which naturally would have some teething issues. From then until now, the game has been running under their ownership, and a lot seems to have changed about the website and presentation, but most significantly, the microtransaction marketplace has been revamped. I'm not sure whether the plan is just to milk the franchise dry of all it's worth, or if there are big things planned for MixMaster going forward, but given that the game still needs to run in compatibility mode for Windows XP, something will need to change. To clear things up about their involvement with MixMaster, I emailed Joypool Games with a couple of questions. I've had my email forwarded to their business team, but I haven't yet had a response, so it doesn't look like I will, unfortunately. Let's suppose then that the game does need rebuilding. How would the fundamental mixing mechanic work? For those of you interested, here's a high-level breakdown of how it could be implemented. In this case, I'm using Godot to demonstrate. The first thing I need for the mixing system is a way of representing cores and monsters. To do this, I've made a resource called Monster Data, which has a unique ID, a name, a level, and a picture. These come from a script called Monster Data, which exposes the class name Monster Data, which can then have resources created from it. Now that I have a way of representing monsters, I need to decide how to represent possible combinations of those monsters. Typically, a database would be used for this, but for the sake of demonstration, I created a global autoload singleton which initializes a bunch of combinations and acts as that database. The combinations themselves are another type of resource called MixResult. A MixResult has two unique IDs, which are the same as the ones in Monster Data, a Monster Data result and a base mix success rate. Next up is the interface. In the actual game, you have to drag and drop cores into their slots, but I don't have time for that, so have manually assigned Monster Data resources to those slots. Nonetheless, to achieve this, I've made a scene called Mix Monster Slot, which shows the image, name and level from its corresponding monster data. This information is loaded in the ready function of the Mix Monster Slot, but can also be changed using its set monster method, which will be used when creating the results. The mix menu is a scene set up to show the two cores that will be mixed, a button to perform the mixing, and a result. Clicking on the Mix button uses the Mix Manager. This is a blank node, which is a child of the Mix menu, and does the actual mixing by calculating a success rate, checking the possibility of a mix from the database, and returning a monster data resource if the mix is successful. Once the Mix Manager finishes its mixing, if the result is successful, then the set monster method of the result Mix Monster Slot is called to update it. Otherwise, the label beneath it lets the player know that the mix has failed. And that's about it. With a few fancier graphics and a bit more robustness, it wouldn't be too difficult to closely replicate what's done in the game. So what worked and what didn't? Well, it's impossible to pinpoint what caused MixMaster's ultimate demise. The game isn't dead, but the player base is much smaller than the alleged 2.3 million players during the Seed C era, and it's more full of pay-to-win features than ever before. Back in 2003, it was framed as a competitor to the likes of Pokemon and other similar monster-catching games, but it never reached that level of popularity. That doesn't mean it didn't have great success as an MMO, and remains underrated to this day. The monster mixing mechanic is a great twist on the usual catch and evolve gameplay which has been used so many times now, and the amount of options ensures a unique experience for each player. On the other hand, mixing monsters can be incredibly unforgiving with the high failure rate, especially when trying to create new ones. It's a fair way to keep people playing and perfectly fits an MMO, but it's a real shame that the most straightforward way of making it easier is to buy premium items with real money. The combat doesn't have much depth, which makes sense for a game originally made in 2003, although the aggression of some enemies is crazy and they'll chase you across the whole map, forcing you to load into the next area to get away. They can also be really strong, which isn't great when you're exploring somewhere new and aren't expecting it. In my experience, the gameplay doesn't change enough from when your cores are about level 40 onwards to keep things interesting. As the quest lines were so disjointed when I played, there wasn't a clear path of how to progress either, which massively affected my motivation to keep playing. If this game was released as a single player game today, I do think it would do well, as it didn't benefit much from being multiplayer. If anything, having to optimize systems to run an MMO likely limited the complexity of the game, meaning more interesting but computationally expensive features weren't added. That's entirely speculation, but I think it's fair to say. Given the abundance of modern pixel art indie games, it wouldn't be fair to say that the graphics wouldn't hold up, but revisiting old sprites and animations would help bring some life back into the game. I don't think a move to 3D, isometric or not, would improve the gameplay experience much either, because the game world is creative enough already, and limiting development to simpler constraints might encourage creativity, kind of like when musicians had to write whole soundtracks using only a handful of synthesizers in the 90s. Looking back, it's safe to say that MixMaster's success years ago was down to the interesting twist that Seed C put on the monster game formula, and it wasn't held back by technical limitations in the 2000s. Unfortunately, its biggest strength, the mixing mechanic, might also have been its biggest weakness, as expecting players to risk losing hours of work to an unsuccessful mix was a bold design choice. In today's landscape, where people want the maximum reward for minimum effort, there's a much bigger chance that players will cast the game aside quickly once they realise what's at stake. Adding a premium marketplace helps with this, but the game hasn't really changed enough to stray from its original target audience, young people who want a free and fun game to play with no financial commitment required. As I run a few online services myself, I can completely relate to the need to bring money in, as nothing online at that scale can be provided completely for free without the business operating at a loss. Despite this, I think MixMaster is in need of some significant modernisation if Joypool want to be able to compete with other big MMOs that are around today. I strongly recommend checking MixMaster out, as it's an incredibly entertaining experience and free to play, so you only need to play it as long as you want. If you see me around, come and say hi, but for now it's annyeong ikaseo CC, hola Joypool Games, and goodbye to all of you wonderful viewers. PS, this is a new type of video for my channel, so if you liked it or think I can improve anything for the future, then please let me know.